today's Energy Central Power Session entitled Purpose-Driven AI, Building a Bridge to Value with AI. Before we begin, I would like to thank CGI for making today's event possible. Now, I'm happy to turn the floor over to the moderator of today's event, Mike Smith, to kick things off. Mike, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, PJ. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. And of course, thanks for our panelists. We've done some really good prep work coming into this today. So I think we're going to have a pretty engaging session today, and we're going to dive into it. I'll be introducing our speakers, and we'll be diving into that discussion in just a few moments. But first, I'd like to just maybe share a few thoughts that I think will help set the table for the discussion we're about to have and kind of have us all thinking around the same sets of issues. So, of course, we're going to start talking about data, because you can't talk about AI without data, right? And kind of the interesting journey that our industry has been on for upwards of 20 years now is the whole smart metering and smart grid events and implementations. And it started with, if you all remember, your old meters got read once a month, and I'll call that 12 data events in the course of a year. And when we switched to smart metering, typically anywhere from 10 to 20 years ago, depending on what utility you were at, all of a sudden you had over 35,000 data events a year. Now, more recently with AMI 2.0 coming online, you'll see utilities like SMUD, and SMUD has started upgrading their meters to 5-minute interval reads. So you can see in a relatively short period of time, we've gone from 12, again, what I call data events, to over 105,000. So that creates a lot of opportunities. That's why we're doing that as an industry, but of course, a lot of challenges as well. I wanted to start there just to kind of paint the picture of where we've come at a very foundational level over the last, like I said, roughly 2 decades, which leads us to talking about this value curve that the Utility Analytics Institute has come up with. And it's really helpful just in terms of kind of thinking about, where's my organization on this journey? I would venture to guess that for every point on the value curve, your utility or your group within the utility has a story about each step along the way, going from these massive volumes of data and learning how to leverage them for value, be it with basic reporting all the way through predictive and prescriptive operations, which of course is where we're heading. And we're going to get into some of those use cases and examples and share some stories of people who've gone along on this journey. We wanted to include this just to demonstrate that the AI space in utilities, it's big and it's growing. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I think what is interesting is how it's growing, where it's most impactful, and where some of the challenges are. And those are the sorts of things we'll be getting in today's session. Next slide, please. And along those lines, there's a lot of opportunities here. And I'm sure the folks who are on our panel and those of you who are joining us just attending today, you all probably have some war stories that you can share as well. But I will just point out a couple of use case areas that I think are particularly interesting, some of which we'll touch on today. One is around the customer. As this customer data has become richer, more available, there's a lot of things that utilities are now doing to get those higher levels, not only of engagement, but what I like to call participation. I think that's the next step after engaged, where the customers really kind of have to be participating in a lot of these different programs for what utilities are trying to transition into over the next decade or so. It could energy efficiency programs, it could be demand response programs, EV charging programs. All of those things are really going to impact the way the grid will behave going forward. And we all know that's very critical, particularly with some of the load that's coming online that we're all seeing and hearing a lot about. I would also suggest that load forecasts is another one that I just wanted to touch on for a minute. Historically, I think we can all, or rather are all familiar with top-down load forecast models. Big central station generation, calculate growth, etc. And there's definitely a methodology there. But what happens when 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of that generation is distributed? Is that top-down approach still going to work? I don't think it will, and I think our industry is moving towards a different model that I'll call bottom up in terms of how those forecasts are going to be made. So those are all positive developments. We're all moving in that direction. There are a few challenges on the AI journey as well, and we'll talk about some of these today. Data quality and data governance will always be a thing when it comes to data and analytics and AI. That's something that I think has improved greatly over the last 20 years as an industry, but that's still something to keep an eye on. Also, skill gaps, really interesting when you look at how utility needs in terms of the workforce are changing as the workforce changes. So, for instance, if you're shutting down a fleet of coal-powered power plants, you probably don't need a bunch of mechanics for them anymore, but you may need wind turbine technicians, you may need data analysts or data scientists. So there are these skill gaps that are happening, and in some cases AI can help fill them. In other cases, AI is part of the challenge in filling those gaps. And also just aligning business processes to take advantage of all the new things that AI brings to the table. For instance, there's the age-old saying of, you can't just throw technology at the problem. You really need to rethink that business process, particularly as, again, those data sets become more available and richer. So having said that, I think we're going to get started on our discussion. So as we dive into this, what we're going to do is I will introduce each of the speakers individually, and I'll ask each of them an opening question. So we're going to start with David Radford. And David, thanks for joining us today. David is a technical energy lead at Databricks, specializing in data analytics and AI within the utility industry. He partners with utility providers to enhance operational efficiency, grid reliability, and customer engagement through advanced analytics and machine learning. He's experienced in electric and gas utilities. David has contributed to modernizing infrastructure with forecasting, remote sensing, geospatial analysis, and predictive maintenance solutions. Those are some sweet spots where AI is definitely having an impact. He collaborates closely with stakeholders and technical teams to promote innovative data platforms and AI-driven applications in the energy sector. David, thank you so much for joining us today. And as I said, I am going to start you off with a question. I know that you've worked at a number of utilities, including Southern, who's here with us today. But can you just share maybe a couple of examples, be it at Southern or other utilities, where there might be what I'll call that low-hanging fruit in terms of, hey, there's a shorter path to value with this mass amount of data that we have, and we can apply some AI. So what are some of those AI-driven use cases that we may call low-hanging fruit, where there's that more immediate value, if that's even a fair way of framing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Really appreciate being here, speaking to everybody. Working with a lot of utilities across the U.S. and across the globe, many of them are on this journey to modernize their data infrastructure. They're doing migrations from legacy technology, you think Hadoop, Teradata, these sorts of things to unlock that value. And what I've seen is they really get stuck in the weeds of that technical migration and sort of start to miss the forest for the trees of what they could unlock if they start to inspect what data sets and things that they're bringing on, and what new capabilities that they could do with this data that they couldn't do before. One of those areas is AMI data, right? There's a treasure trove of information hidden away in AMI that wasn't really accessible before, just because of the vast volumes of data. So some of the things that are quickly accessible, you talk about orphan meters and being able to find meters that are consuming energy, but no one's paying for it because you don't physically know where that meter's at. There's things like meter to transformer mapping that can inform transformer load analytics and correct GIS information. You start to get into revenue protection, and all kinds of other things like disaggregating EVs. I see all these as very pointed projects that become building blocks for that value chain, and you can start building and extrapolating on top of these. The meter transformer is a perfect example. That's a building block for doing transformer load analytics. You have to do that first before you can move on to the next one. And I see teams all over the world that do this with very small teams, limited data sets. They don't have to boil the ocean to get there. And then they can start to prove that value through those smaller use cases.
You anticipated one of my follow-up questions, David, because when I was reading your biography, you talked about predictive maintenance solutions. And then that was kind of in the back of my head. And then you talked about AMI use cases. So right away, I was thinking transformer management. So are you seeing people really putting that AMI data to use to model transformer loads and even predict failures? And what are some of the other data sets that they use as part of that whole mix?
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. the transformer load analytics is a great way to start to model, do I need to upsize or downsize this transformer when I go to replace it? But then it can also start to inform, if I have historical load information on that transformer, I can know how often was that transformer actually overloaded or over capacity. And that can go to inform failure rates, and start to prioritize either inspections or how do I start to prioritize replacement of these 20, 30, 40-year-old assets? Because a lot of these transformers mostly don't have sensing capabilities on them. So you have to rely on that AMI data to link it up. And that's why it's so vastly important to clean your data first, have the correct GIS mappings of those things before you can actually tackle those things. So yeah, GIS, AMI data really go into doing that sort of thing. You really have to have a good grid network topology to be able to solve those problems.
Right, right. So in theory, as we sit here on our power session today, that sounds easy, but of course, the devil is in the details, right? But I think that's a really exciting space because every utility has countless thousands of transformers, and as EVs and electrification start to come online, we're really going to have to rely on those transformer loading models, or we're going to have a lot of problems. So great way to start us off. Thank you, David. I'm going to move next to our second panelist, Gabby Leo, who is part of CGI's U.S. National AI Strategy Team, where she plays a pivotal role in shaping enterprise-scale AI initiatives. As a seasoned principal data scientist, she has partnered with over 30 clients across a range of industries where she has designed, implemented, and scaled impactful AI solutions. With deep technical expertise and a strategic mindset, Gabby brings invaluable insights into what it truly takes to deploy AI successfully in complex enterprise environments, along with the real world lessons learned along the way. Boy, amen to that, because like I said, I think we're all on this journey, call it the value curve like UAI does. But let's start with something that maybe is, with Gabby, with you, that is tangible in terms of some of the work you're doing with utilities, with you and the CGI team, where there's a number of use cases, and we kind of touched on them in our opening remarks, everything from customer to forecasting to operations to finance, et cetera. But where are some things that you see some value, not only in, hey, we've been able to successfully do this, but maybe where there's a proven ROI tied to that, because ultimately that's what's really going to matter. So maybe just speak a little bit about that whole incorporating the business requirements with the technical side, where, hey, here's a technical solution that drives these business results. Where are you seeing some examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think what I'm hearing a lot lately is people are tired of POCs, they're tired of MVPs, they want to see the ROI, and they need that proven ROI before they want to even invest in a solution that needs to be understood. And so one example I have is working with a power generation company where they had outsourced some of their review of damage on their wind turbines to a third-party company. And they had invested, to David's point, in building out that data infrastructure that's needed. They built out a data lake platform. And within that, they were actually able to think about, okay, if we can go out and use drones to take images of our wind turbines, can we bring that capability in-house? Because we now have a data platform that can store these images. We have the compute and the processing to do the AI on top of those images. And so they did do a project where in 8 weeks, they were able to use those drone images and try 2 different types of models, more of a custom model that was built with machine learning and another model using a vision API. So today with AI, there are so many models that are pre-trained out there that can bring you a lot of value without having to build something custom. So we tried both of those. And in doing so, the ROI they were able to drive was that the model was just as successful as what the third-party vendor was doing. They were able to displace this third-party vendor, which they used to pay $1 million a year, to inspect all of their assets just one time a year. Now with this in-house platform, they can inspect on a quarterly basis. So back to that preventative maintenance, predictive maintenance, right? We're moving further up the curve, right, to be able to identify that much sooner than just one time a year. So that's a hard ROI right there. Not every use case, it's as easy to calculate a hard ROI. Sometimes there is a soft ROI, it's time savings, right, where people can go and do different things. But anytime you can calculate one of those hard ROIs, I think that's going to give the rest of the business and the organization an easier way to jump in and start adopting AI when they can actually see that ROI.
Yeah, that's the home run, right? Being able to maintain or improve things like reliability maintenance practices and doing so with a financial benefit as well. I do have one brief follow-up because I want to make sure I heard you correctly, because I think this is the hook right here. The accuracy of the AI models was as good as or better than what they were previously doing through a third party. Because a lot of times you heard, well, it was about 78% accurate or whatever, but it sounds like there's been a leap here. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, with a lot of these new models that are coming about, they have been trained on thousands and thousands and millions of images already. And there are industry specific models out there that you can go purchase or use off the shelf that have already been trained on wind turbine damage historically. And so you can use those models and then supplement with your own images on top of that. So you're not starting from scratch anymore. You're using a pre-built trained model that already can do object detection, and you're supplementing it with your specific organization's data and what you're looking for. And that is why we're seeing the accuracy getting to at a human review level or higher. And in a lot of cases, it actually captures things that humans may miss in some cases as well. So we're seeing with the advancements in computing and just some of those off-the-shelf models that accuracy has gotten much higher.
Good
stuff.
Stuff.
That's a trend I'm starting to see too, Gabby, is that utilities are wanting more and more, bringing things more in-house rather than having to ship my data off to 10 different third parties, having to ship the same data off and to this black box that they don't own. They can't customize. They have to pay, top dollar to get. And to your point, this advancement in technology and AI, being able to iterate and do that themselves and do it better on their own data and keep it in-house.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. This is a very repeatable framework, right? Building the lake house, building this computer vision model, monitoring this model in production. These are all frameworks that you can reuse for the next computer vision use case. So it's not like you're just building this as a one-off solution. It's for a specific project, but the platform itself can now support a lot of new use cases and continue to save costs that way.
Good stuff. All right. Nick, you're batting cleanup. So let me introduce you to our audience. We're very pleased and fortunate to have Nick Watley with us today. Nick currently serves as the Director of Enterprise Data and Customer Analytics for Southern Company Services. In this role, Nick leads a team focused on data enablement for both internal and external stakeholders, as well as system customer data science initiatives in the key company focus areas like large load customer growth. I think we're going to want to talk to you about that with what's going on today in the landscape. Personalized and proactive customer experience and affordability. Nick has held various roles in forecasting, regulatory affairs, and data and analytics across Alabama and Georgia Power and Southern Company Services. He's a proud University of Alabama graduate with a BS in chemical engineering, as well as an MBA with a concentration in business analytics. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to kick off your part of the session today with a question about utilities and how, again, over the last 10 to 20 years, depending on which utility we're talking about, there's been literally billions of dollars spent on this smart grid and smart meter infrastructure, or what I generically call intelligent infrastructure. So if we kind of take a step back and look at this, can you share with us how you all are capitalizing on this richer and more accessible data, particularly on the customer side of things? Where are you able to, as per my opening remarks, move those customers from maybe static to engaged to participating, and how is the data and AI enabling a lot of that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate the kind intro. So a couple of things with AMI. I think if you look back, 20 years ago, we were fairly early in the AMI deployment, and so some of the functionality we see today is like kind of crazy to think about, right? It was the promise of AMI, I think a lot of times was more efficient meter reading. AMR, you don't have to have somebody go out and physically do that. So there was this cost savings, and I think the data was almost an afterthought, right? Of like what all you were going to get. And I loved your graphic in the intro, right? Of 12 reads to 35,000, 100 and some odd thousand per customer. I mean, that's crazy to think about that proliferation of data. And ultimately for us, as we're really kind of in this embarking on our AMI 2.0 journey, what is capable in that intersection of our operational teams and our customers' premise is wildly different and is changing, I would say even like kind of month to month. There are all kinds of ideas and thoughts about where this is going to go. But just with the data and just kind of your granular reading, maybe watt hour, 15-minute reads or 5-minute reads or 1-minute reads, we're doing some really cool and innovative stuff. And I'll just shout out the fact that we do have like business unit data teams at Southern Company. You got an AMI data analytics team that I work with a lot, a power delivery data analytics team, and of course, in my world, more the customer analytics teams. But really, those lines are completely getting blurred. Right? It's just it's product building on data for our customers, for our regulators, our stakeholders. And the latest thing we're kind of working on, and it's building on a specific use case that I'll talk through, was EV detection. So we operate in the Southeast on the electric side, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi Power, and we have a lot of knowledge about the EVs that are enrolled in certain programs. It could be a managed charging program. They could have taken advantage of maybe a home charger rebate. But we worked across the enterprise to really build out a EV detection model so that we could understand where customers were charging at their homes, and really kind of have a pulse on the growth and the proliferation of that end use. And it's been interesting because what started for an operational benefit, those operational teams that I just mentioned, we're doing it to say, hey, is the grid ready for the growth that we're going to see or that we already are seeing? I mean, are we going to have overloaded transformers? Do we need to be investing in certain neighborhoods maybe so that they'll have the capacity to handle a clustering of EVs? Well, when the customer team came to the table, we had a very different view. We said, how can we better market all these programs we have, right? Like if we've got known people that are charging at home and we've got program data, how do we make sure that customers are on the right rate that they maybe should be on? How do we market a managed charging program that's beneficial to our ops? How do we make sure that those customers are getting the rebate that's out there? That if they don't have a awareness of it, then they may not be getting that $500 rebate. So we've taken this kind of broad view on it, and AMI is just the core that allowed all those different use cases. And it started with one. So when we talk about return on investment, the original cost of doing that project and that collaboration, it was really the return on it was one specific use case for ops. But we start to stack those use cases on top of each other, and really you get to like way outsized ROI in terms of what you spent to get the insight and then how you operationalized it, how you made it valuable to your business units. Go ahead.
I did want to jump in with a question. So part of that whole EV engagement, EV owner engagement, that's what I'll call it. Yeah. So obviously the smart meter data is foundational, but can you speak to what maybe some other data sources that will help you there? So for instance, I've worked on and read about instances where, they're reporting in demographic and socioeconomic data and real estate data. Is that all part of the mix in terms of you being able to target these folks more granularly, be it just in general or even with messaging?
Yeah, so we haven't quite made it to the personalized messaging piece, but it's definitely on the roadmap and in our backlog. The part where we have made progress is on kind of the demographics and the customer type. So one, demographics data is a complete separate data set, and then our customer information system, where we've got a rich history on the home type, the age, at times and in certain jurisdictions, we've got really good insights on end uses that we've maybe incentivized, electric end uses that we've incentivized over the years. And so you get this kind of 360 view of the customer, like who are they, what do they care about, and then where are they enrolled? And that lives in probably 3 other systems if you really think about it: program data in one, customer information system another, demographics another, AMI another. And to kind of round this out and to maybe point to David and team, where we're going with this and how we're doing that is really with that lake house paradigm, where we've got domain specific lake houses and we can federate data across a power delivery lake house over to a customer lake house and build data and analytics and insights product on top of that kind of data foundation.
Breaking down silos. Love
Breaking
that.
down-
There you go. All right. By the way, we are starting to get some questions from the audience. So I'll just remind everyone, please, if you have questions or even thoughts that you want to share with the panel, please feel free to jump in and hit that chat. PJ from our team is monitoring that, and we'll make sure we do our best to get all your questions answered. So at this point, I do want to ask one of the questions that have come in, and I'm going to ask this to the panel. So I'll just read it as it came in. As applications begin integrating internal AI, they will require access to data lakes rather than relying solely on point-to-point interfaces. Very timely with what we just talked about. This shift raises architectural questions about supporting application-centric models versus deploying AI dashboards directly on the data lake. What challenges or opportunities does this present? So I think the heart of the question there is application-centric models versus deploying AI dashboards directly in the data lake. So what are the pros and cons of those different approaches? Who wants to take a swing at that?
I can take a swing at that, and if
There we
others
go.
want to join in as well. I think we are seeing a really big shift into embedding AI into applications versus having a one-off job, like a batch job and a data lake platform just running and making predictions that are being pushed to a Power BI dashboard. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of microservices being built and APIs being deployed. And so I do think it's important that those APIs are managed in a central place in the same way that you're managing your other AI models that may be running on a batch schedule. So there should be one central governance structure where you're understanding your model registry and the different models that you have deployed and all of their performance in production, whether, again, it's embedded into an application or not. So that's my take of the challenge we're seeing, but the opportunity is that your team can get together and start having a greater view across the enterprise of all the different models that exist versus having them in each of their own separate systems. So more of that discoverability across your organization, I think, is an opportunity.
Yep.
And I think bringing to Gabby's point, bringing that model to the data rather than relying on that batch push of data out to some model, especially as data gets faster, you need more insights quicker and more real time. It starts to make a lot more sense to embed that model in your data pipeline as the data is flowing through and make those inferences. And I think people are starting to move away from like just surfacing insights in a dashboard, because someone has to come look at that dashboard and make a decision, and instead pushing those insights directly into the systems that take action. So like think a work order. You come up with some insight that needs a human action. It needs a truck roll. That action should be pushed and prioritized in that system that handles that work order and that prioritization. I think that's the benefit of it, is more actionable things that happen automatically without a person having to make a decision that a truck roll needs to happen, for example. Challenges with that become, now you need these integrations to these external systems to push insights into and things of that nature.
Let me ask a follow-up. As we talk about this, and you all have way more depth than I do about the architectural side of this, how big of a swing or how heavy of a lift is it to kind of switch up the approach in terms of, I think the term that was used was bringing the application to the data versus the other way around. So how big a shift is that as a system architect who may be listening to this, think, well, that sounds great, but holy cow, we're gonna have to rework our whole architecture, or am I overthinking that?
In my opinion, it actually gets simpler, because now you don't have to worry about like, what data do I send in batch out? How do I authenticate? How do I make sure that data stays secure? It's happening within the data pipeline itself, incrementally bringing data in and passing it through the model, rather than having to have these like export jobs or things of that nature that have to bring it out. So I think it actually vastly simplifies the architecture. And by and large, these models are portable, right? So you're using an XGBoost model, you're using a deep learning model. Those are portable across platforms and capabilities. So
I would say, I think the key is just ensuring that those pipelines are set up to bring the data out of your applications into your data lake so that it's readily available for those models to be worked on. So if that's not happening today, that I think would be the biggest overhaul. To David's point, the rest is pretty simplistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
One piece on that, Mike, that I do want to call out, because it's a really interesting and great question, but I'll approach it from a different angle. Is anytime we're creating an insight or in something we want a person to act upon, and that could be a program manager, a CSR, a forecaster, somebody running the call center, we want to reduce friction for them. We want to put it into the tools they're already using, right? And so there's this whole like change management and like getting people to buy in and like believe that this is going to help them do their jobs. And so that is one of the areas where I think we're really focused, is like, how do you get it into the pane of glass they're already in and not make them go through the effort of jumping to another screen or another widget. So I just think that's critically important, and the architectural considerations are probably beyond my technical depths, but at least on the how do we get people to use this stuff, it's got to happen there.
Right. Agreed. I'm going to stay with data for a minute. And David, this is one of the things that we had talked about in our run-up and prep for today's session. We've talked about this a little bit. Utilities are swimming in data. I think we can all agree on that. And they're doing a much better job of managing that data now than they were in the past. So the next step, of course, is deriving value from these massive troves of data. So you work for a data and AI platform company. What are some things you're seeing business and technology leaders within a utility? What are they doing to move down that path to value? And again, this can be a technology question, like we just went pretty deep on the architectural side of things, or is it also as much a business or an organizational thing as well? To Nick's point, where they're knocking down some of those silos. So, what are some of those things where they're moving down that path to value and really realizing these really massive investments in this intelligent infrastructure? So what are you seeing with the utilities you're working with?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, Mike, and one that all of the customers I work with have struggled with in the past. And I think it's a three-part thing in my mind. The first is you're hit with this wall of, I can now do anything I want to. I have unlimited use cases to go and tackle. How do we narrow in and start to actually show that incremental value? And if you're just starting the journey on this road, you need to find what those high value use cases are and narrow in and focus in on those handful of things. And it becomes like a people problem too. So partnering with the business entities that are going to champion it for you after it's successful. So assume it's successful, you need to find the people that can champion it for you. Otherwise you get stuck. And I've seen this happen before. They just get stuck in this, is this valuable or not? You got to prove ROI. But once you find those people that can champion it for you and you make them successful, they evangelize it in the organization, and then suddenly your door is being broken down with people that want to implement something similar. They want to solve a problem. So you just need to find those champions in your organization and go tackle their problems first. And then the rest just kind of comes in flowing. I think the second part of, sorry, Mike.
I was going to ask a follow-up, but I think I know where you're going, so I'll hold off and then I'll ask a follow-up actually for one of our other panelists.
So two more points that I think are incredibly valuable here is stop thinking about data as just simply structured information. And you have this treasure trove of structured data, right? Time series data, though, now is unlocked through AMI. You have this unstructured data sets, PDFs, imagery, to Gabby's point about the wind turbine inspections. You have LiDAR, you have all this veg management that you need to do. How do you start to make those all talk to each other, right? So you need to mix all these different data sets, multimodal information together, and that really truly unlocks like the next level of what you can get out of the data that you have. And it's vastly important to be able to make them talk to one another. And then the third point is find a platform that you can do all of this on using a single governance pane of glass. And when I say that, I mean, how do you secure all this different types of data? Multimodal data is not something that we're typically used to. You're used to putting table access controls on something, but now how do you control access to specific LiDAR files or imagery? So you need to be able to govern that and be able to discover it as well. So how do you allow users to discover this vast treasure trove of information? It becomes like this overwhelming thing that you can't find what you're looking for, and you need to be able to, in semi-natural language, be able to discover and find the data sets that you're looking for.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think some of that really, to your point, really does. It's the people and process side as much as the technology and data side. For better or worse, a lot of times that's how I look at those problems. Go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in there. Something David said that we're seeing with a lot of organizations is it's great to have AI champions, but if you truly want your entire organization to adopt AI, you need to change the way they think, and you need to make sure everyone's AI literate. And that's not just training, that is the adoption piece as well, and getting hands-on and even understanding, can I trust this AI output? Should I be digging deeper? And understanding when should you be using the AI and when shouldn't you? All of that plays into the people in the process. And you can build AI models and deploy them till you're blue in the face, but it comes to the adoption, and that needs to be from the top down and from the bottom up. And those AI champions are the bottom up that are going to get all the teams excited about it and using it. But there needs to be some direction from the organizational leaders as well, that, this is our strategy and we're all going to become an AI driven organization. I mean, it's vital to be competitive in today's landscape.
Thanks, Gabby. And I'll ask a follow on. Nick, I want to ask you, because one of the things that you said in your opening remarks was kind of the blurring of the lines between the different AI or analytics teams. And we're talking about AI champions on either the technical or the business side. So, and I can remember some of the early work I did in the analytics space almost 15 years ago, where there was always that organizational challenge. There may be a really deep technical skill set that you can't do this thing without, this project, this initiative, what have you. But, it's typically the business side, the VP of operations or what have you, that's pounding his or her fist on the table saying, I need this thing done. So that whole idea of who owns the initiative, what's a model that has emerged that's worked well with you all? Maybe just comment on that. And by the way, I do see questions coming in from the audience. We'll get to those in just a moment.
Yeah, so a couple of things, Mike, and I agree wholeheartedly with what everybody said about kind of the top down, the grassroots bottom up, and then how those squish together and you get kind of somewhat pervasive buy-in. For us, I think I work in the services part of the organization, right? So I'm here in support of the operating companies that are, Alabama, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and it's really just deeply embedded partnerships with those teams. It could be the call center directors, it could be the digital customer engagement teams, the account management teams, but it's really like getting to know them, their challenges, their opportunities, and helping them to think about what is possible with data analytics and more AI. And so there's this literacy piece that Gabby hit on, right? Is like they got to know enough to even like think to come to you. They got to trust you enough to come to you with their challenges and their opportunities. And then really it's kind of like it's coming through for them. It's proving that like you can make their life easier, you can make their customers' lives easier. And then at the end of the day, one of the areas where I think we struggle the most is like we're not short on ideas and we're not short on a willingness to go pursue them, but we're really challenging ourselves on how do we fund initiatives, right? There's a lot of different regulation across the different jurisdictions I mentioned. There's different teams that have different cost structures, and so we're like the buy-in and the excitement about it's there, and it's like, all right, now we're at the point of like, well, how do the dollars flow? Do you seed fund and say, hey, we're going to have a prioritization list and work a backlog? Do you bootstrap it and do it bottom up and grab piecemeal it dollars from each org to go make it happen? That's really one of the big challenges we're thinking about is what's the right way to make sure this happens so that there's not undue friction to go get the work done, because the ideas are there, the excitement's there. It's just about making it happen.
Yeah, for sure. As you were describing that in the back of my head, and I don't recommend this for anybody, but it's the old, are we going to ask permission or forgiveness? Because we want to get this stuff done. So I think sometimes there's maybe an element of that too. I don't know if I would recommend that, but see some of that too. Go good stuff coming in from our audience. Thank you. So keep it going. I'm gonna pull up one of these here, and again, this is for the panel. This is an interesting question. How do you safeguard against marginal hallucinations with embedded AI, and what are some best practices?
I can start with that. We always start our thinking on the far left side, which is human in the loop, especially when you are building some of the first AI models for your organization. There should always be someone reviewing that, making the decision to press the button to approve. To David's point earlier, automate a truck roll, who's reviewing that at first to make sure a truck needs to be rolled, but you're saving a ton of time by the AI doing the analysis, right? So that would be the first step when you're first adopting AI in your organization. Secondly, I would say grounding it in your context, in your organization's data. A lot of times you can do that with RAG or fine-tuning models. So making sure that you're giving it your company's context and it's not going to answer anything outside of that context. You can set thresholds and say, hey, if it's not 80% similar to what my company has here as the data that you're being fed to this model, we're going to go ahead and not even answer this question because it could potentially hallucinate as well. So those are two things that come to top of mind, but again, it comes back to that AI literacy too, is that people need to be able to know, can I trust this output, and when does something look a little bit off and maybe I need to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think there's two faces to this. One is kind of more traditional, like ML models. They don't hallucinate; they just give you wrong predictions, right? And in those cases, like being able to have that human in the loop to give feedback and fine tune that model in the future. But like Gabby pointed out, it's reducing that human interaction. Hot sockets is a great like example of this. Is you're not going to find a hot socket until it lights on fire. Or melts the socket on the meter. If you can apply AI and find those ahead of time, you roll a truck. Most of the time you're right, hopefully. Sometimes you're wrong. That human feedback comes back from those inspections and you can fine tune that model. When you get into like generative AI, yeah, to Gabby's point, like grounding it in your company's data, using things like LLMs as judges in pseudo real time as those interactions are happening and measuring, hey, did this answer use some grounded information? If it didn't, that should flag, the development team to be able to look into it and triage that problem. So.
And something David said I forgot to mention that I think was a great call out is the feedback loop is so important in both traditional and generative AI. And anything that we build, we want to understand in traditional machine learning, normally, week, month, year down the line, you can go back and see how accurate your model was in those predictions. And when it's not accurate and you see that the performance is lowering, you then go use that data to retrain the model and you create that feedback loop. And with generative AI, a lot of times when it's chatbots or recommendations that it's giving, you can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then you can continue to use that information to refine the model. So in theory, all of your models should get better over time from an accuracy perspective because it's seeing new things and you're continuing to retrain it on that new data. And that's why that AI ops, ML ops piece is extremely important if you want to keep the accuracy high and the hallucinations low.
Good. You all both used a couple acronyms. I want to level set with our audience. Gabby, RAGs?
Yes, that is retrieval augmented generation. It is when you have data that can be structured or unstructured, think like PDF, Word documents, and you want to supplement an LLM's inherent knowledge with that data. And so a user would ask a question, you would then go search against that data, which is normally stored in a vector database, a way a computer can compute the similarity. And then it returns the most similar information back to the LLM, and the LLM uses that information it plucked that was similar to then answer the user's question along with its inherent understanding of natural language already.
Okay, good. And just again, to level set, LLMs.
Large language models.
Right.
Anyone that's using ChatGPT, that is a large language model that's out there. There are hundreds of them at this point that you can utilize.
Yep. Okay, good. That was helpful because I think actually some of those acronyms are being used in some of the audience questions, which are starting to stack up here, which is kind of cool. So we're going to dive into some of these. Here's one again for the panel. what tools do you recommend to introduce the AI technologies to leaders throughout an organization? So we've talked about that whole top-down, executive sponsorship, as well as that bottom-up grassroots approach. When you have, your C-levels and your VPs who may be really deep in finance or legal or engineering or what have you, what are some of those tools you would recommend to get them up to speed on AI so they understand this is why we need to investment, these are the benefits, this is the ROI, et cetera? What are some of those tools that you all would, or maybe it's not a tool, maybe it's a process?
I'll talk through the easiest one for us. We're a Microsoft shop, as I'm sure most people are, so we do have a huge footprint at Copilot now, and that I think has been really helpful for kind of the more senior leaders to like get exposed to it and use it in their own like personal productivity ways. When they see how it can maybe summarize a 100-person thread email and just give them quickly like, hey, what's the bottom line? They start to think about how that could be applied in their business unit. It could be, call transcripts. They're like, oh man, like we don't need to have somebody read through and say that's a call about a high bill. That AI could do that for us. So I think, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, like embedding it in where they already are. If they're already in Teams or they're already in Microsoft and there's a little button that they can click that exposes them to AI, it's been really helpful to gain traction and get them familiar with it. The next step, I don't know. I think we're like enterprise AI and embedding it into the tools is probably a whole different question. But personal productivity and exposure, Copilot's been really great for Southern Company.
Any other suggestions?
I would say rely on vendors that you work with today. They're more than eager to come in and show you the value. You might get some annoying follow-up emails, but there's no harm in ignoring them and get value from those vendors. Force them to help you educate those folks that you need educated.
Okay, good ones. We got a bunch more, so let me jump over to one here that maybe a little more tangible. Is the panel seeing much use of AI in OT or operations technology yet? So SCADA, automated switching, et cetera. So where is AI being applied in that OT environment that you all are seeing this early on? Anybody want to take that?
I can start something a little bit here, I guess. Maybe less generative AI, agentic type capabilities, but a little bit, I think, is, the predictive maintenance capabilities of this, but that's very vanilla, right? Like, predicting something's going to fail is like very bottom level. You have to do that. But building on top of that to make a more complex system of, I know it's going to fail. Now I need to go look up my parts inventory. Do I have a part in stock to fix or replace this? If I don't, I need to order it. That's part of the automation. Do I have people on staff that are qualified to fix this? When are they available to fix it or go look at it? Coordinating the schedules through that. And then taking in things like weather information. When's it safe to go out and fix this? Are there storms or are there high winds where I can't have a bucket truck? So I think starting to organize this in an agentic way really and orchestrate all these different things that go into fixing something that's beyond just, is this going to fail or not?
And I can give a very real example for that. I worked with a natural gas compression services organization where we built a model to predict 4 hours before a unit would potentially go down. What was the probability of the unit going down? Why would it go down? And to David's point, okay, because we saw that these sensors were behaving in this way, we think potentially this is the part that is going to be needed to fix this unit when it does eventually go down. And so we would give a parts recommendation, and then we would wrap all of that up together, and we would create an automated service request, and in that service request we would put all the information in there. There was still someone manually assigning the service request tickets to the technicians to go out there, but that would be even one step further in the process, is kind of automating that end-to-end workflow, which I think is the biggest thing we're seeing right now is process transformation. And to David's point, not just a piece of, is this going to go down or not, but how do I transform the entire process end to end with that information that I'm getting?
Yeah, those are very helpful.
One conversation I had probably in the last maybe 2 weeks on this topic was the need for more streaming real-time data in that space to make it effective. I think the best we're kind of doing is near real time, and really, I mean, like sub 6 seconds. I think it's actually what the person told me that works in that space was like what they really needed. And we've got some things to work through, I think, from a security standpoint and our operational systems versus just the batch kind of like human in the loop systems. If we're going to really deploy it, but that's a huge part of the value proposition, right? Is that like help these systems be smarter and don't have to have that human in the loop at times. So that's one that I think we're still grappling a little with.
Yep. Okay. One thought I had while we're on this, and by the way, there's more coming in from the audience, so we'll get to those in just a moment. One is around the outage. I think that's where some of these needs are just so acute. And when I look at AI capabilities, and I would love to hear y'all's opinion on this. Where are those opportunities to apply? Is it around customer communications? ETRs is always a big challenge for utilities. Is it around prioritizing work crews? Is it around sectionalizing or auto sectionalizing to minimize the impact of outages? Outages are arguably a huge issue for utilities. The old statistic, people only think of their utility for 8 minutes a year and it's paying a bill or during an outage, right? So anything you can do to improve that. So have you all seen any examples of where AI is being used in that outage scenario?
Yeah, I can touch on one. At CGI, we have a lot of IP, and we were working with one of our utilities and asset IP teams to build in a predictive model to accurately predict the outage duration based on a ton of factors that come in from the meters, as well as weather and other things like that. And historically, how they used to do that was a very, very long nested if-then statement that was very rule-based, and it was not very accurate. And we built an ML model in Databricks, trained on this historical data, and we actually increased the accuracy by 44% using a traditional machine learning model. And we weren't predicting the exact time to the minute of the duration. It was within buckets of how long it was going to be out, but that down the line would help improve customer experience, right? So hopefully if we're giving them a more accurate estimate, they're going to be happier with our services, and we're not consistently sending, that text that we all get that's 10 more minutes, 1 more hour, now it's 4 more hours, right? So that model helped a lot for a lot of our customers.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm going to jump. I'm sorry. Did someone want to add to that?
Quick.
Yeah, please.
I got one more, and this is a huge shout out to our power delivery data and analytics team. They've built out a storm prediction tool that they're now using ahead of major weather events. And so they've traditionally kind of purchased predictions of what's going to happen. This is a homegrown tool. And essentially 5 days out, we get kind of a sliding scale of a color and it's really based on the number of incidents that we think are going to happen. And they have already started using this ahead of storms. I think this is kind of the first year we've been using it for staging, for call out. We're looking at 2 other applications right now for our damage assessment teams, as well as staffing in the call center. And so taking the weather data, our historical outage data, it's actually a machine learning algorithm, is probably technically what I would call it, behind the scenes, that's really done a nice job of matching what we see from an incident. Now getting down to like specific customers out stuff, it struggles a little bit there, but that's where we're putting some effort, and that's kind of where they are in the next phase of the product. But for incident response and getting those resources ready to go, boots on the ground, and in the right place of our territory, it has become a highly effective tool.
Right. Yeah, I think the pre-positioning and the staging that you mentioned, but also mutual aid. If you can have a more accurate estimate on the impact of the weather, you'll run into that. I was on a business trip in Nashville, and the hotel we were at had 100 bucket trucks in the parking lot, and they were headed to a storm and got turned around. So they were headed back. So, you see these things, and these are real costs and real challenges. So anything that improves the accuracy on that, that's awesome.
Yeah, the other side of it is employee satisfaction, right? I would argue that getting called out and then just sitting there is probably not the most pleasant experience for our team members, and if you call it a mutual aid, the cost savings and employee satisfaction piece is really big for us in terms of conveying the value of why that's a good tool.
Right, right. They're thinking this isn't what I signed up for. So yeah, good stuff. All right, I'm going to jump to a question again from our audience, and this is one that I think is important whenever we're talking about anything relative to data, IT, or systems. What are security risks that leaders should be educated on when using some of these AI tools like Copilot or ChatGPT? So what are those security risks or challenges when you're doing that on company resources? Do you all have some thoughts on that?
I do. I have been cautioning every CSO I talk to, if you think people in your organization are not using ChatGPT or public models, I promise you they probably are. So it's better to invest as an organization and get your own version of that and build it up. And that way they have to sign in with their enterprise ID to get access. Anything that they're putting in there stays within your organization's firewall, within their own environment. That data is not being trained on the public information. So to me, it comes down to giving them the tool and giving them access internally in your organization so that they're not going out and using the public tools. I've heard countless stories of this, or I've gone to go train people in how to use ChatGPT thinking they have the enterprise version, and half of the people there sign in, just the normal public version. So just really, make sure that from the top down, you're giving people access to those tools.
Yeah, make sure you own your data, right? Any contracts you have in place with these LLM vendors, be it Databricks, be it AWS, be it OpenAI directly, make sure those contracts are in place that preclude them from training their models on your data.
I will jump to another great one from our audience. Given data residency, ownership concerns, and regulatory laws, do you see data clean rooms being used more to enable federated AI training rather than centralized training on sensitive data? Again, this kind of speaks to some of the things we've touched on, that organizational and people and process side of things as much as the technology. But where do you all see this landing? Anybody want to take a swing at this one?
I can open it, I suppose. Data clean rooms, yeah, definitely see that starting to be used to collaborate across organizations and make sure that your data stays your data and you're not exposing things that you don't want to expose, but you can both collaborate and build things together. Also seeing a lot of like data sharing capabilities come into play, where you share views of your data that are anonymized, but allowing it to stay in place rather than using legacy kind of FTP style things that are clunky and just hard to make incremental things happen. So I think both of those capabilities really come into play here.
And I'll just touch on that. I think governance, we mentioned it earlier, it's not going away. And I'll actually say it's even more important now. I think we saw a bit of a lull before AI and data governance, and now it's picked back up. And it's not just governing of your structured data, it's governing of your unstructured data now. And so when you're building these AI systems or your trainings, if you have strong governance, there shouldn't be issues, right, of people getting access to sensitive data because you have role-based access based in there, who can see what, right? There shouldn't even be a way that they would be able to see that if you have all that set up properly. So I think a very big focus on AI governance, data governance is coming back into the picture, and we need to think of new ways to tackle that. And one of those ways, shockingly, is with AI, right? AI can do a lot of things now. It can look at your data quality. It can help you classify different data from a regulatory perspective and things that you need to do there. So use the power of AI to help govern your data.
One thing that I feel like is coming up a lot in my discussions internally and then with other utilities is the fact that if we look at like our traditional governance, compliance, security functions, there was like this period where they were like very afraid of all this stuff. And I think we've started to make some progress on like we have more visibility now into our data than we've had before, right? Like I feel like from Unity Catalog and some of the lineage tracking, like I could have probably not answered some of the questions that I need to answer previously with more of like this on-prem world, like just where the data went was sometimes just obscured. And so I think that the kind of AI working to solve the challenges of AI is an interesting point that Gabby made. But I also think it's like we have such good visibility into the data if we get it into the right place and we manage it properly, that we're better off, and we're honestly probably better able to answer questions that might come up from regulators or customer complaints or whatever it may be. And that it sounds like kind of the opposite of what you might think, but we've been working with our compliance folks to try to give them an idea of what the tooling looks like and how it's different, and maybe even better.
All right, good stuff. Another one from our audience. Again, this is for the panel. Do you see a future where you engage with third-party agent-based digital twin technology for informed planning and decision execution, or would you only look to generate that skill set internally, whether organically or through acquisition? So I think the question there is, where do you see third-party agent-based digital twin technology fitting into your organization for decision making and decision execution, or is it something that you would do strictly internally, or maybe there's a mix and it's driven by the use case? What do y'all think about that one?
Yeah, I think it depends on the domain. I do think a lot if you start to think about distributed energy resource management systems, or DERMS. I think that there's going to be some big players in that space that are maybe where you're looking to partner. I think in some other smaller places, maybe in your customer experience world or something, you might be home growing some of those skill sets. That's an interesting question about, I don't know that I quite follow the agent-based idea of the digital twin tech, but yeah, I think it just depends on where we're talking about, what domain, and then what really we're trying to accomplish with it. Because utilities are getting more tech savvy and tech capable, but they are not big tech companies, right? We're not going to throw $50 billion at some sort of technology to build it, and like there's this growing sentiment that the utility industry, to solve these big problems in front of us, may have to kind of come together and rally together as an industry versus individual companies to solve some of these big challenges. So that might be part of the solution through some of the industry groups too.
Yeah, and that is something that our industry has almost uniquely, is this willingness and ability to share, to move towards solutions, be they more process oriented or more technology oriented. I'm sorry, Gabby, I think you're about to jump in as well.
I was going to say, I just think this is a classic build versus buy scenario, if I understand the question correct. And it's a ton of considerations that you have to take into account. Strategically, normally you would choose to build something if you're going to think that as your IP, or it's a strategic differentiator for your organization, and you don't want that data leaving your environment. Oh, and by the way, you need the people that can manage that infrastructure, and they have that skill set to spin it up. So from a maintenance perspective, can your team actually take on the ownership of that throughout the life of that product that you're going to potentially build? So I think it's greater than just should you do one or the other. There's a lot of considerations that come into play there when thinking of build versus buy.
I think there's a lot of different levels of digital twin as well. So like anybody on the call, right? Like digital twin is a digital representation of the physical world. And you can take different levels of this depending on what you're trying to do. One of those can just be simply data processing that's happening automatically based on digital signals coming in from sensors and things like that in the world, and making automated decisions. Like predictive maintenance is a very good like vanilla example of this. You can move up the stack to where I need to actually visualize something, maybe like on a map, for example. And meter to transformer mapping is a good example of this, where you're automatically producing some insights and surfacing it in a map for a human to look at and get better contextual information about where that meter is at and why you're maybe calling it out as not tied to that transformer. And then you move up the stack even to like 3D digital models, where I can like walk distribution lines and see certain aspects, vegetation, encroachment, things of that nature. So I definitely think there's like a ramp of this, and depending on the ramp of that, you get all the way down to those 3D digital models. That might be a specialized thing that a specialized vendor has to do, but the other things you might be able to do in-house. So,
All right. couple more from our audience. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, but thanks again to our audience for filling up the queue here. There's some good stuff here. So let me ask our panel this next one. It was mentioned that to make AI more actionable, it was the suggested action needs to come all the way into the system / pane of glass for the application. So I think we talked about, for people to use this, it's got to be on that screen that they're already on. They can't be jumping around too much. Are there some examples of where this is happening on the operations side of the house? Where operationally do you see this happening? And this could be true on the customer side as well. Where do you see good examples of this?
I can give an example more on the call center side of the house. So we've been working with a lot of organizations to help AI enable their call center. So in real time, it is transcribing the conversation. It's using that transcription to then go out against the knowledge assets internally that organization has to go say, okay, maybe this is what the customer wants to know about, or it's going to go kick off an agent that automatically pulls back information on the billing status of that customer, or whatever it may be. We're seeing a big agentic system kind of going out and figuring out in real time how you can help assist that customer. And if you think of a call center agent and probably how many screens they already have to look across to be able to find that information before AI, it's a pain and people get frustrated. And a lot of times you go on pause or on hold and they have to go talk to their manager or something else. So we have done our best to say, how can we reduce the number of head turns, and can we incorporate, instead of them having to sign into 5 different systems, using these agents to go get the information from these systems and bringing them back into that central UI. And that call center agent just has to look at that one screen to be able to help the customer now, instead of going into the billing system, going into the service ticket system, whatever it may be. So I think that's one very real example I can give.
Yeah, that's great.
Another great one I like is a utility out of Eastern Australia does 5 minutes aggregates off of their rooftop solar. And then they use that information to inform them about grid congestion on the distribution network. And they can actually send control back out to those inverters and control what's being exported back onto the grid. So it's an automated process that runs aggregations, does some modeling on network congestion, and then pushes those control signals back out. That kind of plays even to that OT question that was asked a little bit earlier too.
Now, does someone sitting in the control center have visibility into that, what you just described, Dave?
They will, but these actions have to happen faster than a human can make decisions on. But there's a human monitoring still and seeing, those insights are still surfaced, just actions being automatically taken.
Right. Okay. One more from the audience. And I'm going to see where you all go with this. I'm not sure where this one's going. What use cases has agentic AI integrated in the energy and utility sector? Any thoughts on that?
I will be honest in sharing that true agentic AI is not happening everywhere. We do a survey called Voice of Our Clients, and right now we're only seeing 6% adoption in true agentic AI in production. So don't have a ton of use cases to talk to there. The one I just mentioned from a call center perspective, that is an agentic AI use case, but that's across all industries, so not necessarily specific to energy and utilities. I do think it is coming, but there is a lot of management that's needed for agentic AI, and a lot of integration from a security perspective and a data perspective. It's a bit harder to operationalize, I would say, than more traditional machine learning. So I think that's why we're not seeing as rapid as an adoption yet, but I do think it's on the cusp and it's coming.
Okay.
I would agree, Gabby. We do not have any of that in production. I don't even think we have any in prototype yet across Southern that I know of.
Okay. One more audience question, at least one more. This is actually kind of a 2-part question, so we'll break them up here a little bit. So this is someone who wants to know, is Southern Company approaching, or how is Southern Company approaching connected worker and connected asset use cases for technicians and field crews? So is AI being used to impact and improve the efficiency, effectiveness, safety of those crews out in the field?
Yeah, I can just speak to that softly. It's not really in my wheelhouse, but we do have a program and initiative underway for Connected Worker for our field workers. I think it's got some kind of bones and structure to it, but it's still pretty early in the timeline of it. And I would argue that the safety angle is the one I've heard the most about. Really making sure that particularly folks that end up in like lone worker situations have almost like a digital counterpart in the name of safety and keeping them aware of whatever inherent risk of that job that they're being asked to do.
That's a good one to land on. Let me ask the second question, which is a little bit different, but the same person asked it. So to David's last point around digital twins can be upstream or downstream in different layers of data. What use cases are most important or top of mind? And it says for Southern Company, but I'm going to ask that to the panel. What are those use cases around the digital twin that are most important? Maybe these are things that are not fully productionalized at this point, but you're starting to see some traction and some value in.
I think with one organization I worked with, again, on the natural gas compression side, they were very interested in digital twins to understand if their assets were performing as to what they said they were set to and should be performing at. And because of that, we were actually able to discover that the lube drip rate for these assets was actually either over or under lubricating based on what we had actually set the machine to run at. And they were able to have huge savings based off of that, right? So I think it's really just the comparison of we set this thing to run a certain way. When we actually put that into the digital world, are we seeing that? And if we go and make a change from a simulation perspective, how is that going to affect costs downstream or even other processes downstream as well? So that's one example I can give.
Yeah, it's a good one. Anybody else have a good digital twin example you can share with our audience today?
Only one that I've heard us talk about, and this is in the ops world, is it's basically like, how did we dispatch and then rerun it and be like, all right, given what we actually know happened, how would we have dispatched in an ideal state? If we had known that one unit was gonna, kind of false start when they cranked it up, maybe on a hot day or a cold morning. That is one thing that I've heard some of our operational leaders say is a point of learning, in that they want feedback on, we know that we're not running every day exactly optimally. Well, let's use a digital twin concept to mimic all those operating conditions and environments and start to learn from it. So yeah, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think another one I've heard people talk about is doing like simulations for EV on distribution, feeders, and what happens if I add 10 more EVs to this feeder? Do I need to make changes to it to be able to handle that load? Things of that nature. So you can start to build in some forecasting of EV adoption plus some simulation on top of that as well.
Yeah, digital twins, I think we're starting to see more of in the utility industry. I know just from my limited exposure to the manufacturing sector, those are becoming really core to how they run some of these large plants, particularly around predictive maintenance. And I think there's some really good analogies of what we're seeing in the manufacturing world in the generation space and ultimately in the T&D space as well. So I think as that capability ramps, I think we're going to see digital twins being much more commonplace, and the use cases are seemingly endless in that space. Let me jump over to you, Gabby. One of the things that we talked about was moving from POCs or pilots and then productionalizing these AI solutions. So I'm going to ask you for what may look or sound like a checklist. What does that checklist look like to get people going from pilots to productionalized AI-driven use cases? Maybe just a quick rundown of what folks should be thinking about as they get on that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And as mentioned earlier, again, most organizations we're working with want to move as fast as they can to production out of the POC phase. So we try to start very small, max 2 to 3 people on a POC. You want to keep it lean. These should be people that are innovators, scientists. They can quickly go out, look at research, and build something and prototype it. And show, don't tell. I think that was a question earlier of how do you get, leadership understanding that these tools can add value. We always try to tie a demo around it. Imagine a world where let's go show them what this new process is going to look like. Never just go show the code or the accuracy of the model. You need people to truly envision how this is going to change their day-to-day workflow. And you need to go get that buy-in, and you need to go sell it to other business teams and sell it to your leaders and really build that story around it. And once you have done that, you have to build the roadmap for production. So if we are going to productionalize this, these are the hard ROI or the soft ROI that we're going to be able to achieve from this. And you have to track that metric once you get into production. I think that's one thing a lot of people fail to do. You need to set a time limit and say, okay, we said that in 3 months' time, we were going to have XYZ savings. Did we see those savings? And start with a small pilot group. And if so, after those 3 months, you start expanding and bringing in new units, new teams, but really don't try to boil the ocean, which is something David said earlier, and start small to prove the value and really track that progress and success. And one other piece I didn't mention that I think is important is having what we're calling our AI engineering pods. Having people that have worked on similar data before, they have good, domain knowledge of that, being able to have that well-oiled machine of scientists doing the POCs, engineers building the microservices, a centralized testing team helping with testing the UI and the models, and then a front-end team. If you structure this pod correctly, you can be cranking through 2, 3, 4 use cases in a 4 to 5 month time span, right? Because it gets passed along that pod and you continue to bring in those new use cases and give it to the innovation team and then pass it along that area. So we found that to be very successful in using that same team to execute a lot of similar use cases.
Great. David or Nick, do you have any experience, as you all have seen in David's case, either your customers or Nick at Southern Company, where you are moving from POCs to pilots, and what are some of those hallmarks that you all have seen that, hey, we're doing really good work here? What does that look like?
I think Gabby really hit a lot of the good things that I would also say. But yeah, making sure that the outcomes are actually tangible and set. That's where I see people get lost a lot is we're going to do this. We don't know why exactly. And we just hope that we come out the other side and people like it. You have to have tangible value that this is delivering. And that goes back to like my intro question. Like that's how you build champions inside your organization to continue to champion whatever data program that you have.
Yeah, one thing I'd emphasize that Gabby said, and then add in one other kind of component that we're using for productionalizing advanced analytics and AI is the SME involvement, subject matter expert, like at the table. That's one thing we've done really well on our operational side in terms of really even how we build the teams. Like they're product owners with decades of experience working as a reliability engineer, building a reliability product. Same with like call center, right? It's somebody that is sat in that seat. I like the head turns. When the Gabby mentioned, I call it like shifting apps or whatever. Head turns is way more a better way to describe it. But it's somebody that can really describe where they maybe spend time that they're like, man, like it doesn't have to be this hard. Getting that like buy-in and that person at the table is really helpful to your architects, engineers, and scientists that are trying to build out something that's helpful. Nobody wants to go spend time on something that isn't going to move the needle or be used. And so get them involved on the front end and leverage their background and experience. The other is for us, I mean, just to be frank, like employee-facing AI applications and tools are really like path of least resistance right now. If we were going to deploy it and not have a human in the loop, or go ahead, if we could even embed it in those apps, like that just gets so much more scrutinized. And I mean, we all know utilities are very risk averse, and a lot of us have been around for 100+ years, right? That's part of how we're having a little bit of success and pockets of success, is making sure that it's facing that employee in some way, and that they're equipped with something that drives an outcome for a customer or for themselves even.
All right, good stuff. As we come near the end, I had a couple of questions for the panel. I'm going to start with one around affordability. So I think, as we've all discussed and have experienced, most utilities, maybe all utilities, they have some sort of affordability initiative that they're putting in place or acting on. This is one of the biggest issues. I think reliability and safety will never go away, but today affordability is capturing a lot of attention and a lot of work. Where might AI be part of the affordability solution? Where is it a question of maybe doing things more efficiently internally? Of course, there's always a lot of administrative things that can be automated. Are there things with the customer side of things where, again, more granular engagement of the customer? What are y'all seeing where AI is part of the solution for these affordability challenges we're seeing as an industry?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, Mike, and then pass it to David and Gabby. The first part I would say is like foundational affordability is like driving cost out of the business, right? You've got like to really change the affordability paradigm for a lot of our customers. Like you've got to have it drive cost out of your business model. And so I think that's where you look into, how we move and serve electricity. It could be at the generator, it could be at the T&D level, it could be at the customer service level, but there's, I think real tangible value that could drive down that cost paradigm that's foundational. The other is in what I'll call more interim or kind of near-term solutions, and that might be in how we enroll customers into an income qualified discount, or how we get them a payment arrangement, and how we maybe reduce some of the friction to get connected with a partner agency that might be paying part of their bill. So I think there's like this long-term play, which is like, let AI and all of its promise come to fruition over years and drive a lot of cost out of the business. And the other is more near-term in how we engage and personalize those interactions with our customers.
I don't think I'll say anything much different than Nick, but like doing, tariffs smartly and intelligently, I think are one way to start to tackle this problem. But by and large, that only tackles like 1/2 of the population. You're thinking like rooftop solar, batteries, EVs, those things aren't things that everyone has access to. So you can only impact so much through that. But to Nick's point, like reducing the cost, O&M cost, reducing that through using data and AI. I think of like a very specific pointed example, veg management. Move away from time-based kind of rolling schedules of veg management and invest in those AI capabilities to do like more intelligent veg management that can tell you, I need to trim this part, even though it's off schedule. I don't need to trim this part, even though it's coming up on schedule. Doing things like evaluating that veg project that's going to need to be trimmed and cross-referencing that with your bid from your contractors that are actually trimming that. Does it match? Is it in the ballpark, or are they way overcharging you? So using AI to just more intelligently do things everyday work. Veg is just one example.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Dave, I love the vegetation management use case. I think the technology's there. What's interesting is, having done a little bit of work in the space, it really changes the paradigm of how that group of folks in the utilities function, up to and including critically how they budget. We've been doing it this way for 20 years, right? Every 3 years we do, and then you're throwing a wrench into our budgeting process. So I think there's a path that organizationally utilities have to go down to where they're seeing those benefits and understanding that, hey, this is a good thing. It may be a little uncomfortable at first, but this is ultimately a very good thing.
I think.
All right.
I think a lot. Sorry, if you want to cut me off. But
No,
I think a lot of utilities see that problem as like a very big problem, right? Like I need LiDAR, I need drones, and it's this like overwhelming amount of data that they have to figure out and collect. But I see utilities starting like much easier in just like sat imagery and they cross-reference that with faults. And it gives them a macro level where to start rather than like having to be so fine-grained. And it's just a jumping off point to show that incremental value. So
Yeah. Yeah, and there's definitely a kind of a learning curve of, the percent that's manual versus AI driven and how that changes over time as the models get trained and people frankly just become more comfortable with that. So yeah, good stuff. Gabby, I'm going to finish with a question to you. You are CEO for a day of a large utility, no pressure. You have seen your organization investing in intelligent infrastructure for years and you're generating terabytes of data. So what is something that you would do from that corner office as the CEO where you would make sure you want to maximize the ROI from these investments? Because these are not trivial investments, and your utility has gone down this path. You've had some successes, but maybe you're the executive pounding your fist on the table saying we need to get more value out of these things. So what are a couple of things that you would do as that executive leader?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a lot of this, but to be very clear and pointed, I do think that a very clear AI strategy at the highest level of the organization needs to be in place. And that is, how are we going to enable all of our people with AI tools, but also what are the top AI use cases that we're planning to execute across the entire business? We're seeing a lot of different pockets of the businesses experimenting. Some of them are working on the same things. They never get to production. Who is actually managing and saying, yes, business A, B, C unit, you are going to go work on this and report back in 3 months and tell me what the metrics were and if we're going to productionalize this. And so I do think there needs to be some sort of central committee governance group that is driving the AI adoption and AI strategy at an organization on top of that data, right? It all comes back to the data that's being used in those models. Secondly, something David mentioned earlier, your partners are hungry. They want you to use their platforms. They are giving a lot of incentives right now to make sure that you're using their new and greatest AI tools. And they actually, just like consulting companies, right? They work with a lot of organizations in your industry. They have proven use cases that they know are driving ROI. So it's not a gamble to go do this AI use case. You know that another organization in your industry has done it. Therefore, it's likely to be successful if I have the right data in place as well. So I think those would be my top two levers, is making sure you have an AI team driving that strategy, and then you're really relying on your partners, your technology partners, and the tools that you invest in today to get some help.
Good boy. I was going to say there's a whole nother discussion around that, and Nick may be addressing some of this, but as you're describing that, I was like, yeah, I can see the different roles seated at the table of that AI council. And I think there's questions ultimately who owns that strategy and executing, and that gets back to some of the organizational things we were talking about. But I don't think we'll solve that today. But Nick, go ahead, jump in, please.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing, if I found myself in that seat, would be, it would start with the data. It would be anytime we build a new app, purchase a new app, deploy new enterprise software, that we start with the data in mind. For years, it has been an afterthought, and I think we deal with the consequences of that. I've seen us use tools and systems, and we basically don't have access to our own data, that our customers' data, our joint stewardship over that data. And those are just, it's something we signed up for. So I would almost like blank slate and be like, who we work with from a technology and app standpoint, and how we create data and capture it at its initial point of creation is going to be with the end in mind that it is one day going to be part of an AI application, and it's got to be secured, managed, governed, and available in some useful platform, maybe like the data lakehouse, so that we can get the full value out of it.
Go for it, David.
I would add one more sledgehammer item. I would ask for a report of every data set and how much it costs to ingest and how many people have used it in the last 90 days. And I would start to trim some fat.
Yeah, there you go. Good. Well, listen, we are about out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been a great discussion. Thank you for those of you who contributed questions to our discussion. Also, thank you so much to our panelists. So much good stuff we covered today. Really appreciate it. And PJ, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, panel. Fantastic conversation. And thanks again, of course, to CGI for making today's event possible. For our audience, please look for a link to give us your feedback. We'd love to hear it, and we do use those feedback on future presentations. From everyone here at Energy Central, thank you for joining. We look forward to seeing you on a future event. This does conclude today's presentation. Have a great day, everybody.